am I crazy for spending all this time on a deal that is still nowhere near the finish line? At that point, what keeps you going isn't logic. So the first job of a writer is to collect a number of disparate but interesting thoughts. And then the second job is to find the connections or the patterns between them to begin to create more of a cohesive arc to the narrative that you want to tell. And then you realize as you continue, it's like, oh, most of what I'm talking about is the content that I read under the risk factors section in the 10K. Get a kind of long form point of view on how you can help, that full pyramid, if you will. You need to be able to distill this down into 2 to 3 sentences max. Creating written assets that you cannot use for any other account. And what I mean by that is so many people, yeah, I mean, everybody's thinking about, okay, how do I get a lot of leverage and things like that out of every activity, which is what we were just talking about. But the flip side of this, when you need to invert that and turn it around, is to say, generally, the materials that are most effective for one account will never be able to be used for another account because they are so specific and precise.
Hello, ladies and gents. I'm Gridin, and it's Big Deal Talks. And Nate Nasralla, today's installment. Sometimes you think that you know something, and you think that you're really good, but then you stumble upon a person, and you understand that you know nothing on the subject. And that's exactly what happened when I stumbled upon Nate's materials on mid-funnel follow-up and account mapping. I vividly remember, I think it was Amy Volos. I'm not sure, but I think it was her. And she shared your article or she commented on the article and it showed in my feed, article on the, this ocean metaphor when I leave this big comment. And I was just, oh gosh, the guy's so good. That's so much better that anything just I know about account mapping, so I need to get to know this guy. So Nate Nasralla. Nate,
well,
welcome.
Dan, thanks for having me too. That's incredibly kind of you to say. And Amy, you're a gem. Thanks for bringing Dan and I together today. I've been looking forward to this one.
Nate, when I prepared, I promise you not to have this, obvious questions that you've been asked already. So I made a little research and it turns out that you're not only the enterprise selling extraordinaire, but you're a hell of a writer. And there are 2 books of you on Amazon. And could we talk maybe a little bit about it? So when you wrote your first book, so what was the context on your writing your first? I think it was living forward looking backward.
The context on the first book that I wrote was kind of like my own form of self-therapy. I probably should have been seeing a counselor at the time.
Okay.
I was going through a lot of different changes in my life. I 1, sold a company, 2, was moving across the country, and 3, had just gotten married. And so all of those things kind of came together to create some very interesting kind of internal emotional journeys. And I tend to be more of an intellectual, a little bit more introverted. And so my way of processing all of this was just to write about it for myself. And so as I was writing, I started to notice some themes. I was able to kind of connect some different patterns of thought. And over time, I eventually said, I think this could be something. And I was mostly just writing for me. And then when I realized that this could be a book with a cohesive narrative and an arc, I thought, okay, I also tend to be very goal oriented. So then my goal came to be to just, create a little book and put it out there. And so that's how it started. Mostly me processing and trying to work out my own thoughts of what was going on in my life, and writing became a very therapeutic form of that. So that started in 2016. I started just kind of writing, I would call it for fun over time, as I learned how just helpful it was to write outside of work. And because I enjoyed it and started doing it more and more consistently every single week, I would say that's what I really honed the craft of writing that then did translate back into my work life. So there's kind of the quick backstory, and then a little bit of the crossover into my 9 to 5, if you will.
Okay, but did you learn to write deliberately? Because I think you're one of the I don't think even top 5. I think one of the top 3 enterprise selling quote unquote voices on LinkedIn. And when everybody's doing TikToks and this funny videos and posts about this work-life balance and the importance of therapy and yada yada yada, that get this enormous reach. You're writing like old school long reads, and they're so good. So they're so well put together. So I want to ask you, how did you learn to write? So was there a process, or you just...
What I would say is there's not a shortcut. I spent 6 years writing every week and spending my weekends writing because I loved it. So I never really... Yeah, I never really set out to like perfect the art of writing, if you will. It was more something that I genuinely enjoyed doing. And when you enjoy something, you stick with it long enough to figure out what you like, what you don't like. Now, I can go into some of the more tactics of things that I've discovered over those years that will help shortcut.
It would be great, because was it like journaling, or you...
So that...
was it like journaling, or you had some other like framework for honing the writing craft?
I found over time that I started to follow a very similar process to what I heard David Brooks describe as organizing piles. Now, David Brooks he's a fantastic journalist. He's written a few different books, writes for the New York Times. And when I read his writing on how he writes, I was like, my gosh, that is the exact same. So the first job of a writer is to collect a number of disparate but interesting thoughts. And then the second job is to find the connections or the patterns between them to begin to create more of a cohesive arc to the narrative that you want to tell. So for me, that looked like a simple Evernote where I would have a thought, write it out in whatever form it came to me, and then continue on about my day. And this would be in the motion of the day before I had more of the quiet space to begin thinking about the connections. For David Brooks, the reason why he uses the term organizing piles is because he would literally take pieces of paper, write something down, print something out, and then put it in different piles of things that relate to each other. And so for him, he would be on the floor of his apartment looking at all these different piles with thoughts that are related. For me, it was starting up different Evernotes that have different groups of thoughts or experiences or quotes that relate to each other. And that's the first thing, is in the best, most pure form of writing, you're simply working out what it is that you are trying to learn for yourself. And writing is a process of clarifying and distilling that. And that's something that was true in how I mentioned, like the books that I was writing just personally on the side started. And it's had significant parallels or carryover into my work life.
Actually, it's interesting because the process that you just described is very similar to the flow that I learned from the top stand-up comedians, especially if we're talking old school. It's like John Rivers, Jerry Seinfeld, George Carlin, when they gave interviews about how they work. Actually, that's almost exactly the same. So in this pile is the airplane joke, here is the wife joke, here is some not very political correct joke, and then we pile and then we create a narrative. Yeah, because every our stand up is like it has its ups and downs. It has a scenario, so you need to start with this, finish with that, and from this standalone jokes we create this this picture. So it's interesting. And speaking about your writing, I asked some of our colleagues that we all know, I won't name them, and I asked them to verify this thought that I have in my mind when I'm listening to you. And this thought is the accuracy of how you put your thoughts together. So it seems that when you're talking on the subject, you're just reading from the script. And you most probably don't. So did you... Actually, we'll have some links to your interviews for the folks who don't know who you are. I'm really not sure there are any listening to this podcast, but anyway. But when you answer the question, go, oh, Nate, what this, we have this mid-funnel situation. How do you tackle it? And here we go. So you're just, no editing, no nothing. You can put your word just in a book, and it's extremely accurate. So did you train it? Because I think it really is connected to your addiction to writing.
It is very perceptive of you to link writing to the ability to hold a clear conversation. And in a conversation, you will have two different bodies of information that I'm speaking about or that I'm asked about. So the first is things that I've written on, right? When I've written on it, I've already worked out my point of view. And so I know how to communicate around that topic. Because again, there is no better way to prune or purify your thinking than to try to write it out. Then there's the second group of information or questions that I've not yet written on. However, clear and sharp thinking that allows you to quickly arrive at what you believe about the topic and then express it in a very trimmed down or distilled manner. That's what writing trains you to do. So just years of writing, your mind begins thinking in that way, so that much like a comedian, we'll go back to stand-up, there's a certain rehearsed elegance when they're delivering material that they already know and have practiced. And yet at the same time, they've developed a style, they've developed a way of thinking about, okay, when I deliver a long story form, here's how I give the punchline, versus, okay, in this scenario, it's more of a short, punchy, ad-libbed comment, and this is how I deliver it. Right, there's already some well-worn grooves or tracks that they can walk, even if they're testing out new material on the spot.
Actually, that's a very shrewd observation, and I love the link with the comedy. So let me go a little bit like Tim Ferriss on you. So do you have a framework for shaping the thoughts on the topic that you haven't written about? So, for example, you're asked the question about the topic. You have some experience, you have some, desperate thoughts, as you said, but you don't have an article, a framework ready. So, how do you tackle this? How do you tackle this task? So, how do you structure your thoughts on the topic that you don't have any prepared material
so one of
on?
the most helpful frameworks that I find is the pyramid, also called the Minto pyramid. And the basic idea is that all the way up at the top, at the fine point, there is one big idea. There is one thing, one sentence that encapsulates your belief on the topic. Then as you get down into what supports that idea, you have a few main arguments, right? So it may be a story, a point of data, and an example. And then below that, that can branch out or open up a number of different supporting kind of conversations on those big points. And what I find is that often, most people will wander their way up to the top of the pyramid. They'll start with some experiences. They'll start with, more of the anecdotes on the ground floor to arrive at, over time, the big idea. And if you flip that and invert that and say, what is the thing that I believe that I need to state? And then I can support that. It becomes far easier for people to track with you and understand where you're going, because now you've given them a container to put all of your other points inside of and roll up to.
Yeah, and actually it's the framework that you've just described, it's much quicker to deliver, because when we're in the enterprise selling situation, you don't have this 60 minutes or 90 minutes to to create something from scratch. You need to be straight to the point. My next question, and it's really connected and intersects with with writing, with putting your thoughts together. For me, all your content, all your frameworks, they all boil down to one value proposition. Yeah, Nate is the guy who can scale the unscalable. Okay. So when we're talking mid-funnel, bottom of the funnel communication in the enterprise selling, they're usually considered we're just we have this great negotiator. Okay, BDR got the meeting, and then this super selling guy comes in, and he does or she does the magic. But in reality, there are a lot of things that you really can not quite automate, but you can put frameworks around them, and then you can like scale it, and you can teach them to like not very experienced account execs. So maybe let's talk a little bit about this. So first of all, what are maybe the, let's say, top five frameworks that you think are really important to master for an enterprise account exec or seller or what have you? What are the top 5 frameworks?
So I'll kind of go throughout the deal cycle as you're developing it end to end. So to start, you have to understand how a business makes money and loses money. And if you don't understand the fundamentals of how a business operates, then it's going to be very challenging to arrive at a point of view on how you can help them. So the framework that I like for this is called the driver graph or the driver tree. And it basically links together all of the core metrics inside of the enterprise through causal relationships of, okay, revenue may be, and this is where it gets, you may think it may be very simple, but this is where you truly understand whether or not you know this company. So revenue may be a product of all their different business lines. It could be one product. It could be revenue per customer times the number of customers. You have to figure out what is it that is actually driving and moving this business forward. Driver graph helps you break that out very clearly. Now, when you understand how this business operates, then in the next framework, you can put it into the context of a value hypothesis. And a value hypothesis is you creating some type of if-then statement that relates to what the business needs to do to move forward. And so you're creating some type of guess around if this business were to, then they would see X outcome. And that is the first thing that you are, through your account research, arriving at and then confirming through your first and early discovery calls. Now, the third framework, as you begin to develop and you get into the deal cycle a little bit, is this pyramid idea that we were just talking about. That's right. Do you have not only the big idea that you are crystallizing for that account, are you supporting it with other examples or points of research in your first conversations, in your reading, so on. Now, fourth, as we kind of go on, I'll kind of list them out here as we go. So fourth, as we go, I actually just posted about this yesterday, I believe it was, is the strategic soundbite. As you get a kind of long form point of view on how you can help, that full pyramid, if you will, you need to be able to distill this down into 2 to 3 sentences max. And the reason why that is helpful, and typically it sounds like something along the lines of, because of this large industry-wide shift, this company now has to respond in some type of non-obvious, interesting way. If they do, here's the good impact on these core metrics. If they don't, here is the problem and its cost that is going to continue or grow worse. That is the basic framework of the strategic soundbite, and it compresses everything else that you've been doing in the account up to that point into just a couple sentences so that it can be shared and it can travel all around the organization. Then finally, the very last idea is the combination of high leverage, low leverage activities. As you continue, and especially in a large account, like there are hours and hours and hours of work that go into this. And it relates back to your idea on how do you seem to kind of scale some of these things that are unscalable? And the idea is to say, is this a high leverage activity that will return more value for every unit of time that I invest in it? If yes, invest an almost absurd or crazy amount of time into those activities. Don't try to automate those things. Everything else, that's when you need to figure out, okay, if it is a low leverage activity, meaning I'm returning less value per unit of time that I spend on this activity, well, that's what you figure out how to automate, maybe just get rid of entirely or delegate.
question about the fifth framework. How do you count the value of the activity if we're talking like, this 12 or 18 months deal cycle? So do you need to wait for any significant data to show up on your bank account, or there are some other preliminary metrics that allows you to understand that, oh yeah, this is a high impact activity and this is not?
First, you're making some informed guesses. So if you write out 3 different columns,
okay.
Low leverage, neutral, high leverage. Right, and so high leverage being greater than 1 return, low leverage being less than 1, neutral is like, yeah, it's kind of like right in the middle there. And then if you look at first your calendar, try to categorize all the different activities that you're doing. And then 2 is you just go through a week, like write down what is the activity that I'm doing in this moment, and then try to place those as labels inside of each of those 3 columns, wherever it strikes you as kind of the best fit. Now, over time, as you go and you continue to do your job, you can refine these and you'll probably move them around a little bit. And an example of this might be, okay, I am spending hours reading through 10Ks and earnings reports. It's like, okay, at first you may put that as low leverage. It's like, man, I spent so much time reading.
It's one of the highest leverage activities ever, especially if we're listening to the investor calls. It's my favorite thing to do, because you learn so much from the Q&As and, from the voice and from this, the jokes of the execs on the call. So it's my favorite thing to do in the research.
And most times when you start, let's say you were moving from more of a mid-market type role up into enterprise for the first time, you're like, man, I feel like I am just spending so much time reading things that I may or may not use, right? So at first you may put reading through 10Ks in the low leverage column. Now, as you're having some first conversations with this account, you may say, oh, I actually am thinking about some of these things that I read and I'm bringing it up in conversation. Let me maybe move this into neutral ground. And then you realize as you continue, it's like, oh, most of what I'm talking about is the content that I read under the risk factors section in the 10K. Let me actually move this into a high leverage activity and focus on developing content around the language of risk factors that I find in the 10K. Okay, there you go. You've refined that, made it more precise. You now have a high leverage activity, read and develop content on risk factors that I will then use all throughout the cycle with this particular account.
Great. And one more follow-up question. How do you keep track of all these activities? So do you journal, quote unquote, or how do you track it?
It depends on 2 things. 1, the stage of career that you're in. And then 2, just your own personality. So for me, early, I would keep a very detailed spreadsheet where I would list out where my time would go. And I would organize. And it helped me clue into some things that I just had missed, right? It developed a bit of a mental framework or rigor on how I would evaluate where my time was going. And then now it's more gut feel, right? I've done some of the kind of early exercise to bring some analytical rigor, if you will. And so now it's just in my mind. I don't keep that spreadsheet anymore, but I have gotten to a place, and generally I like to, think through problems in my head. And so it works now because I early used more of a structured process. And then today it just kind of fits with my style, if you will.
I see. And to finish this section off, once again, we'll talk about this fifth framework. What are the, I don't know if you want to name 5, at least 3 activities that are of the highest leverage for an enterprise
3
seller?
high leverage activities.
Better unorthodox, because, research is kind of obvious, but...
So there's
maybe something
a couple
else.
Different ones. So 1, creating written assets that you cannot use for any other account. And what I mean by that is so many people.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean everybody's thinking about, okay, how do I get a lot of leverage and things like that. out of every activity, which is what we were just talking about. But the flip side of this, when you need to invert that and turn it around, is to say, generally, the materials that are most effective for one account will never be able to be used for another account because they are so specific and precise in speaking to the things that account needs, right? And I'll give you an example of this. One of the ways that I would go into expanding my reach within the C-suite or the executive suite was creating a very specific SWOT analysis and benchmarking study for that account of where they stacked up relative to others within their industry. So one example, before going off and founding Fluent, I was selling into innovation organizations inside Fortune 500s, think chief innovation officer. They're trying to create some type of new or frontier technology. And they were always interested in knowing and kind of figuring out, because data in the innovation sector is very hard to come across, right? This is stuff that most people play close to the vest. Well, we saw, okay, we could create some pretty interesting benchmarks and data sets around how well large enterprises were engaging with technology from small startups. What does their funnel look like from their external innovation activities, their scouting activities? Can we begin to benchmark this so that others have more of a feeling of where they stand from an objective perspective? And so, one, I spent a lot of time pulling together data. It's not, our customer success team wasn't at the place where they had the bandwidth to do this. So this was me digging into a spreadsheet, creating this data set. Now, that is something that I could reuse across accounts. What I could not reuse was the 20 hours that I would spend interviewing executive leaders to create inputs to then match up against this benchmarking data set to produce a report that I would have all the executives in a room reading over together. And that deliverable, I couldn't bring into any other account, right? So that's one example of what I mean by assets, things that you're creating and handing over to somebody. And most people would say, like, is this like really the thing to spend my time on? Because it takes so much time. It's not necessarily scalable, but it was effective. So that was it. That was a long one. Let me pause there. I'm happy to go deeper if there was something interesting there, or I can go on to the next two to your question.
Actually, the question that I have like right away is how do you sell such an idea to your C-suite? So if you are not in the position to dictate your rules, but you have this, I'm the I'm the enterprise seller who's like, who is doing okay. He hits the quota. He or she hits the quota. So he or she heard this wonderful podcast with Nate and Dan. And all right, let me spend this 20 hours doing like a bespoke content piece for this account. So how do I sell the idea?
How would I sell the idea to an account executive that's listening and feeling like
not to the account executive, but how I, as an account executive, I've already bought, but I need to sell the idea to my superiors in order to implement this kind of or I just need to go after hours.
I would start by doing just a little bit after hours to have enough of something to show to one of your accounts to say, if we were able to do this for you, would that be of interest? Like, would you want to get 4 C titles in one room and talk about this?
Oh,
that's right.
Like soft commit.
You're kind of, call it pre-selling the concept. And once you have somebody saying, yeah, I'm in, like, we want this, then what you're going to talk to leadership about is like, hey, we need to start bringing together some of these data sets. Here's why. This is a direct road into multiple hours-long interviews with every executive inside of this company. Will this help us move this deal forward? Is this a valuable deal for the company? Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Great. Well, they're in if we can do it.
It's like a Kickstarter. It's a Kickstarter principle. So you're like gathering orders before the product is ready. So you deliver the roadmap. Yeah.
And what's really fun, particularly with the first people that you're doing this with, it always starts with a couple people who you're kind of coming to them, on the side and being like, hey, this is a project that hasn't been done before. It seems like you would find this very valuable. Would you want to build this together? And it is a very non-traditional sales motion to come alongside somebody and be like, hey, we're gonna do this
That's
together.
a good
Is
one.
that interest and valuable?
That's a good one. That's so better than this typical basket of cookies with a thank you note.
That's exactly
so
right.
much better.
And that's the fun thing is that when you don't have to say like we have this, exclusive industry first data set. It's like we're going to go build this together. If you're up for it and if it's going to be helpful, we'll spend the time to do it. And the very first time that I did this, what I wanted to make sure was that there would be commitment behind it. And, we didn't have kind of a full discovery process, hadn't talked with the full team. But what I said was like, look, if we get set up in procurement, we do a very simple $5,000 invoice, right? Just enough that we had to get paperwork moving. We had to get set up within their system. Then we'll go deep on this project together. And again, some of the foundation, and this is where you can separate some of the kind of high leverage, low leverage activities. This was a good thing because I could put both activities in the high leverage bucket of one, creating a data set that I could reuse for other accounts. And then two, creating something that would move this deal forward in a way that was going to be extremely helpful. So I saw a path to making this high leverage on both sets of activities. And so, the goal wasn't necessarily to get paid. I certainly spent more team time than 5K, but I went just kind of far enough into making sure that they were in it and alongside.
But they had some skin in the game. So it's not about the 5K and it's not about even the breaking even. It's about the skin in the game because, you already made an investment. So you're like, we're on it. We're on it, mate. This is such a great tactic. And, but the thing that, bothers me a bit with this tactic is the assessment model for selecting the right accounts to approach, in this manner that you've just described. Because if you fail to choose the right opportunity or choose the right account, it will be like a very expensive fart in the wind. Yeah. Sorry for my French.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and that's why.
So do you have any specific thoughts on this? Because one or two failures with this kind of projects in the row can really cost you, especially in the current economy. So I think it's very important to have not like a bulletproof, but accurate enough model for choosing the right tops to pursue. So do you have anything to say here? Yeah,
so if you abstract the principles from that very specific example, really, I guess I gave you kind of a two-part in one. One, create assets that can't be repurposed for other accounts. And then two, build on top of something that can be repurposed. And so the report, let's say it's, you're drafting a press release. Amazon has this great ritual or tradition whenever they're exploring a new project. They create what's called the PR FAQ. What's the press release that we would want to send out to the world? What are the questions that customers would ask us about this? That's the FAQ. And so they have this framework called the PR FAQ that is used for every single initiative. Now, let's say that's the activity that you decide on. The PR FAQ that you're creating for one account could not be repurposed for another account because it won't relate to their business. They won't relate to what their media team wants to send out into the world. However, that framework and perhaps the sections of the press release, the material that you're writing this up in, there are certain things to this that can be repurposed across accounts. And so taking that same principle, applying it to a new example, there you go. And sure, you may end up with nothing after one account. It doesn't go anywhere, and so you wasted this time creating the PR FAQ. However, you've now gotten far better at shaping these in a compelling way because it's still a helpful strategy that could get other accounts excited. So roll it over into the next one and try it again.
So actually, I may add that if you're selling this kind of tactic to your superiors, you might think about selling like it in a package of 10, for example, because from 10,
Sure.
you'll hit 1 or 2. Don't sell like 1. Don't have like one shot, because it's really, it's not really smart. So, okay, maybe let's move from, it's very deep. I don't know. I think our listeners and viewers, they'll write us in the comments. I think it was one of the best 10 minutes of podcasting in my in my career, because I don't remember anybody talking about this.
I'm glad it's a new thought. I'm glad
in
it's
such
a new
depth.
thought.
All the tactics that you are describing, they're very time and energy consuming. But if we're talking like your typical enterprise deal cycle, it can be 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years. So how do you balance? You're a runner, right? Because this big Garmin on your wrist and your overall body type gives me the idea that maybe you're into running. So it's like running long distance. So how do you pace yourself? Cause you cannot perform this type of activities like every month for every account.
Yeah.
You'll just die.
Yeah.
Physically. Not just physically. Like, this, in this, Japanese movies, I think it's called karoshi, when it's death on the job, and it's very, nice thing to do.
So
it's very respectable.
There are, 2 thoughts on this. So one, when I think about all of the endurance sports that I've done, so I've done Ironman racing, I've done some ultra running. There are 3 main drivers behind your ability to go long. 1 is training, 2 is pacing, 3 is fueling. So on training, what you need to figure out and have a game plan for is 1, the type of training that you need to do, but in a way that is aligned with your goal. If I'm training for an ultra run, it's going to look very different from what I've been training for Ironman. One of the main reasons is that you are putting a lot more stress and strain on the soft tissue because of the pounding of constant running, whereas biking, swimming is low impact, right? So the type of training has to align with the goal that you're out for. Number 2 is pacing. So in pacing, what you're trying to figure out is, okay, what is the pace that I can do and hit my goal with enough energy at the finish line. If I am spent at the finish line, I've done something wrong, because you have no margin for error. There's no cushion there. And so what I will literally do is write out mile by mile split times of what I'm trying to achieve. So for example, before I did a big race in Sweden, it was a fantastic race, beautiful course. I remember sitting in the cabin before the race the night before, just writing out on a sheet of paper that I had gotten from the lodge. I just kind of ripped off and wrote mile 1, 2, 3, all the way down the run. And when you get off the bike, your legs are a little spent, so you're going to start off a little slow, and then halfway through, I want to make sure that this is going to relate to the 3rd principle at a pace where I can take on nutrition. So here's the 3rd principle, fueling. The main difference between going from, call it like a half marathon, 13 miles, all the way up to an ultra. Yeah.
Like an S&B sale.
Exactly. And now I'm talking in miles, not kilometers. So I should switch over here. So let's say you want to go from, maybe a 20, 25K to 100K. What's the big change that you need to make? Well, obviously training, which we just talked about. The one that most people miss is fueling. Your body will need more supplements to continue pushing forward. And you can kind of make and fake your way through, a 15K, 20K, 25K race, right? Your body will naturally have enough glycogen stored up to keep you going. Well, fueling, you need to continue to give your body new fuel, number 1, when you're going further, but 2, your body has to adapt to that. Most people get a lot of stomach issues if they haven't figured out the right type of fuel and how to train and teach their body to consume fuel as you're going. And so fueling is something that a lot of new kind of endurance athletes just miss the importance of. So anyway, those are kind of the 3 inputs that you need. The last one that I'll just kind of talk about is the mental game. And this is the big shift. And actually, a guy named Mike Wander put out a great post on this on LinkedIn yesterday, and he was talking about the parallels between selling and endurance sports. And one of the points that he made, which I totally agree with, is when you get further and deeper into the race, it then is all about guts, number one, and two, heart. And you begin to realize that, man, it is so easy because there is no like quick reward, short feedback loop, that instant sugar high of a closed deal.
It's enterprise sales. It's you're
Exactly.
talking enterprise sales right now. It's just that's
Exactly.
that's,
and you're going
that's
to
it,
ask
yeah.
yourself, like, am I crazy for spending all this time on a deal that is still nowhere near the finish line? At that point, what keeps you going isn't logic. It's the love of the process. It's just the gut desire to keep going. And then eventually you hit a bright spot and you're like, oh yeah, that was a great conversation. That's why I'm still in it with this account. And then you keep going for a little while longer.
But can we spend a few minutes on fueling? Because it's, I think, a really interesting, a very interesting analogy. So how do you fuel yourself as an enterprise sale, I don't know, in the midst of the 18 months deal cycle? So you've invested a lot of effort. Maybe it's stuck. Maybe we're going anywhere. Maybe we don't. There is a recession. So everything is like, going back and forth. So how do you fuel yourself?
So one,
what do you do? It's not like, this Monday morning rah-rah meeting, We're not selling insurance door to door.
That's true. So one, you listen to Dan's podcast. You have conversations and you hear other people talking about your craft, the things that you're doing, and it makes you realize, like, oh, okay, I'm not the only one who is experiencing some of these things. And it's cathartic to feel like other people understand and have been going through the same types of questions that you are currently going through. So that's number one. Number two, you got to have fun with it. If you aren't enjoying it, you're not going to want to keep doing it longer. And that's where people look at or maybe listening to this being like, wow, that guy's done an Ironman or some ultra runs. And it's like, look, anybody listening to this could do it if you love it. If you don't love it, you're not going to spend 4 or 5 hours exercising on a Saturday, right? And so it's the same thing is you want to try to reconnect to and articulate what are the things that I absolutely love. And even if I wasn't being paid for it, even if I lost all of these other deals, I would say that was time well spent because I loved it that much. Once you're able to articulate that, try to increase the proportion of your week spent on those activities. Keep stoking that love, and then you'll keep going. And then by the way, one practical thing that I recommend everybody do to that end is take the Spark Type assessment. The Spark Type helps you understand what motivates you, what fuels you, and brings you energy during your week.
I'll add Colby test on top of that.
Yeah, there you go.
Also,
I haven't personally taken that one, but I've heard people speak highly of it, so I might just have to do that after this.
Yeah, and also there is this. It's not like it's a twist of the Colby test made by a brilliant marketer named Perry Marshall. He was one of the I don't know if you heard about him, but he was I think the first person to write a book on Google AdWords back in 2008. Really brilliant guy. Real, just genius, and brilliant copywriter, by the way. And he has this marketing DNA test, which is basically like Colby with a twist that shows you like your selling style. Are you better doing like recording presentations? So are you better selling live or just, it's very interesting. It's, I don't know, it's like I think it's $20-$30, so everybody should take it. It's
there you go.
Great stuff. Okay.
Well, and then I would just say after you've done that, kind of the third thing is it'll vary a little bit, but for me, I look at little milestones inside of a journal that I keep about how I'm growing. And this relates to my Spark Type. I'm a learner. Like I love to learn and accumulate new points of knowledge. And so when I write this down and I can see my own personal growth or trajectory because I have something to look back on, I'm like, yeah, actually it has been a great year because I have been learning things along the way from these different conversations and accounts that I'm having. And most times, you just don't have something to look back on. And so you don't realize how far you've come, even if you're not yet at the finish line, And so this could be, to bring it all the way back to the endurance analogy, I love looking at the map of where I've run afterward to see like, okay, I'm still 10 miles out from the finish, but I can see on the GPS the trail of what I've done, how far I've come. That's a pretty cool thing to look at. It's like, I want to make this.
Okay. So you're beating your best,
You're competing against yourself.
For example. Okay. Great. Any more healthy psyche type tips? Because I think we talked about it like a couple of weeks ago on LinkedIn, the importance of therapy in the enterprise selling environment. Because there is this thought that there is not a lot of rejection in the enterprise, so you're not being you're not being ghosted like 20 or 30 times per day, like typical BDR selling SMB. So you hear no. Seldomly, but at the same time, when you do, you've invested so much in time, in effort, in emotion that it can really break you, especially if there are like 2 or 3 no's in a row. So what are your tips on maintaining like healthy psyche in the enterprise selling environment? Because I think it's extremely important, especially if you're selling something big. And especially with this, new school approach of being transparent, non-manipulative selling, and yada, yada, yada. Yeah, you're open, but there is a flip side to that. You're open, and this means that you can be hurt like really easily.
Yeah, I agree. It's very easy to become attached to an unhealthy degree. You do need to invest to go deep, and that's where it's a very fine line between a healthy and unhealthy level of attachment. Actually, I like the way a guy named Moore from Demo to Close is his company and coaching business. He talks about it's not attachment that's the issue; it's attaching to the wrong outcome. And if you're attached to the commission, for example, versus attached to solving a problem, that is a way to think about a healthy versus unhealthy level of attachment, or where the focus of the attachment is. But back to your question on therapy. So there is one kind of principle that I've learned recently. I finally have the language after working with my own therapist to put to this. It's this idea of chatter. And chatter is the internal conversations, the dialogue that you have with yourself, where you're not always able to separate the story of what is going on because you are creating assumptions or narratives in your mind that don't line up with reality. And so chatter can very quickly spiral into all of the unhealthy things that you talk to yourself about versus just a good internal conversation that can help you arrive at, what you truly think about where you're at. And what I find is that chatter is more pervasive in the enterprise because you go far longer working on your own, building things for a certain account without that type of like consistent feedback that you get in a higher volume, more transactional sales cycle. And so this chatter can spiral out of control very quickly. And oftentimes the point of therapy is to help you work out and bring back to, okay, what is fact and true? What is a story or a situation that you may be creating in your mind? And chatter generally has a negative connotation because it doesn't actually help push you forward in a way that, even something like regret can be healthy.
It's like a false narrative, basically. That's what it is. That drives the wrong way.
The line that my therapist gave me that's written at the top of I use Notion as just kind of like my personal operating system at work. So the line that I have written atop there is, what's the situation that I'm creating, the story that I'm telling myself, and thinking about that when I start to feel that chatter get uncontrollable helps me just kind of bring it back.
And we actually can bring back to your recent post about the map versus territory. It's, the old principle from the neuro-linguistic programming I think it's from the 50s or from the 60s. And actually it's probably, it's almost about the same. Yeah. Okay. Nate, unfortunately, we need to move on because there was, this one big block that that should be like the dominant part of our conversation. And this is, the case that I wanted to throw on you, cause we're talking about, maybe the number one challenge that my clients face, that the entrepreneurs and CEOs of and really mature tech and non-tech companies face. It's this what our friend Christopher Engman calls the rainmaker dependency. So there are only like few people in even in big companies, even it's like billion, $2 billion, $10 billion company, there are still like 3, 4, 5, 10 negotiators who can really close on big checks. And imagine yourself in the situation that you're like a CEO of, I don't know, pick a niche, whatever.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. And maybe it's you, or maybe you have one B2B seller who is really good. You can call him or her account exec, you can call seller, you can call whatever you want. But you have one. And he or she is really out of capacity. So it's really no, nothing. I can do nothing more. So how do you scale? How do you scale this person? How do you approach this? Will you try to hire somebody right away, or will you try to take somebody off this negotiator seller's plate? So what's your approach to solving this situation? Because as far as I can tell, you had this experience in your professional career when you were like the number one seller, and then you had to build a system around it. Yeah.
With the caveat that I wouldn't necessarily consider myself the mega dealer, right? So Christopher is in another echelon. The difference between like a 5 million contract and a 50 million contract is significant. And so it's an area that I personally want to get better at. I wouldn't call myself the world's best negotiator. However,
no, 5 mil is good enough. It's a nice nice chunk of change.
So what I would say that I kind of had call it monopoly on for a little while before I began to build out and scale a team around this, was more of that.
You have 6 months to do whatever you want.
Right. It was that creative element of selling, figuring out what are the types of things that I need to build by way of written assets, materials, assessments, so on, to move an account forward. And so when I was building up an enterprise business unit for the first time, helping a company transition from mid-market SMB selling up into enterprise for the very first time, there was a process of where I personally spent 3 months kind of figuring out how to create this assessment. Then we actually hired in a role. Jack was his name. Fantastic. He was very good at taking the process that had been built and running it for everybody on the sales side to enable the sellers to deliver new materials to their accounts. And so we created an entire position around this process to build the assessments and build out some of the materials behind other account executives.
And assessment was like the part of the pre-sale, right?
That's right. The benchmarking study that we were talking about earlier.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Yep. Exactly.
So didn't get that it was the same.
Yeah.
Same organization.
So it was helpful because it could then be replicated, right? And so I think about when you have one person who is able to create deep inroads and develop significant deals, what are the things that they're doing that could be repeated by somebody else? If you abstract, the personal flair, creativity, whatever it is that they bring, that, one gift that they seem to have, figure out what is the thing that can be repeatable. Can you then hire or backfill and create a new role, job description around this?
Do you have any specific process for figuring this out? Once again, for example, you have this superstar dealer, mega dealer, you name it, that does all this, magic, hits the quota, grows the business, and so on. So how do you approach, the framework that you've just described? So how do you extract all the things, all the actions that he or she does?
So the first thing that you want to try to do is understand and then label what is the environment that they're operating in that puts them in the position to do this thing, right? So if you have a mega dealer who comes in at the very last minute to negotiate something on the back of an incredibly successful proof of concept and a proof of value where, like, look, the account is like, we can't live without this in place. Well, amazing. What are the things that went really well in that proof of value framework that created the context or the environment for them to negotiate successfully? If their gift is the ability to stand their ground, to have a productive conversation, and to have people leaving the room feeling like I wasn't had there, like I'm actually genuinely excited about the deal that we got to, that's their gift. Well, great. Have them do more of those conversations and create the environment for them to step into in the future by having somebody else manage that proof of value exercise to set them up for that and to walk into the room with that context on the customer side. So that would be the way I would think about it. Separate the environment that somebody's operating in from that person's own, skill set.
Okay. Step number 2. So we know that there is this set of tasks that can be delegated. And as far as I can tell, you try to put like a system around automating this kind of task. It can be like account research. It can be creating of some type of content. You've seen this. You talked about this like assessment. What else? What else should you do before hiring a new person?
So the other thing is figuring out and asking, is this person's calendar aligned with their gift? And it's a very simple way to think about, like, okay, are there things that we could strip away and cut away from their calendar and say, like, look, you don't actually have to go to all hands meetings anymore, right? If you can get a recording afterward, play it on 2x speed while you're out for a run, fine, do that. You don't need to be here. And there's going to be things that you do for that person that you don't do for everybody else because they're fundamentally operating differently.
That's an extremely smart retention play, and I'm not talking about customer retention. I'm talking about talent retention, because if you are eager to take off the top performer's plate the things that he or she hates, it's a really good thing to do in order to protect your talent from drifting away to in search for some greener pastures.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if they are
smart,
and it's probably an unpopular opinion in the sense that, as a sales leader, you want to make sure that you're retaining all of your people. And sometimes...
No, you don't.
Well, yeah, I should say good people. All your good people. So there's like, some people may hesitate to say, well, like, I don't want to isolate or single somebody out. But the very premise of the question is, well, they are already singled out because they are the one who is doing the things to land the types of...
I think they're singled out by their commission checks. You don't need to be Einstein to understand that, maybe he's doing something better because he's making like 3 or 4 times the money than everybody else with the same comp plan.
There you go.
Okay. It's, anything else that you would do before going before trying to make a hire?
So the last thing that I would say is, like, do they have all of the cross-functional support that they need? And that was one of the toughest challenges of building up an enterprise business unit to do this for the first time for a company is that, look, the customers you're bringing in require a totally different level of support. And oftentimes that means that things downstream within the company structure need to change, right? And so we actually had to hire on and build in new customer support functions and teams to support these larger customers because the operating model, the economic model around customer success previously wasn't aligned with this type of customer. And the amount of internal management meetings, conversations to just get everybody aligned with this was at points almost nauseating. And recognize that there are going to be other teams behind a person that will operate differently. And I'll give you the moniker. We adopted the name the pirate ship internally because when we were first going off to land larger customers, and this was a time when we were, the entire business unit was built remotely when everybody else was in the office. And so everybody saw us as, oh, there's these people who just kind of fly around. They don't really play by the same company rules as everybody else. They're getting different, structures and incentives put behind them. They're pirates, right? They're going off and sailing and doing their own thing. And that's fine, as long as two, you're building the ships and the structures to enable the pirates to go set sail and do what they do.
As long as you have, docks, supplies, rum, women, everything else, in order to keep the pirates happy. Actually, if we put another metaphor on top of this, actually what you're talking about is building a service desk around the top mega dealers.
Yeah.
But it's not the service desk that fixes your computer. It's the service desk that does an on-demand research, that creates an on-demand content piece, that makes meeting notes.
Yeah, it's that's right. And I
from
guess
the call.
I go further than thinking about just the sales process. You have to think about what needs to change inside of, once they become a customer, inside of the organization that supports them. And that's where it's it's not necessarily, to go back to the rum analogy for a second, it's not about trying to cater to the big dealers and say, whatever it is that you need, we'll do. That's not it at all. It's, hey, look, these are the things that we can do now, the things that we can do later, because we're not totally set up to support these customers yet. So here's how we need to operate and align as a team. So in that sense, it's not what the pirate wants, the pirate gets. It's look, here's how we operate as a team, the things that we can do to support you, but here's what we're building behind you along the way. Especially if you're stepping into an organization where this is happening, maybe, newer for the first time.
Actually, it's really interesting. It's really interesting take on the problem, and it really is very similar to, for example, what Christopher and the Megadeals team they're building around. So actually they're doing not exactly the same that we're talking about, but close. Yeah, so they're creating this ecosystem around the top performers in order for them just, to just sell. Just do nothing, just sell. No admin, no media, no nothing. Just sell, and we're fine.
Right.
And actually,
I was going to say a great example of that is the ABM programs that he talks about. Yeah. Right. It's a structure that is going to be built and developed differently for this team, person, business unit than others.
All right. And maybe the last question. Okay, when we've done with the prep work, we've created this, not the ecosystem, at least we've done, we've built an MVP, and we have a roadmap for building this ecosystem around the top B2B sellers. So, how would you approach the process of hiring your second grade seller? Okay, you have one and you need second one. So what traits would you look at? So how do you approach this? What is your framework?
Yeah, so my framework is I try to get as close to a one-to-one parallel of seeing them do the job as the job that they will be doing. And so application instructions, for example, if you are putting out an open position, a lot of times these are recruited for. It's not like an open call to filter people out. But I will often use an open call to try to get people who will reach out to sell our CEO in the same way that they would approach another account.
So I'm a CEO. I need this super seller. Drop me a line at something.
Exactly. The best hires that we've made, they've done their research. They created a thoughtful kind of point of view in first outreach. They maybe even approached the CEO through another relationship that they were able to develop some type of referral through. Then in that first meeting, they were able to present and say, look, based on my understanding today, here are some things that you're not doing that I think you could do. Here's how that aligns with my skill set. It's oh, that's interesting. Let's talk a little further, right? You did your discovery. Next meeting, it's hey, here's a 2-page summary on the first 180 days that map to the recommendations that we were starting to talk about in the last conversation. Let's talk about this. And so what are they doing? they're approaching the organization in the exact same way
as
that
an
they would
enterprise
approach-
sale, because
That's right.
it's like it's the most important product of your life. It's you,
Exactly.
basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the point is, most interview processes follow a very strict series of steps, application instructions that run through some type of system, and in many ways, for this role in particular, you want to do away with that and watch what is the baseline framework that they already have in place for breaking into a large account. Let that play out.
Great tips. Really, and I cannot agree more, because my best hires were open calls, not from the agencies, not the recruiters. Just here is me. Here is the elevator pitch of the product or of the service that I'm recruiting, like a mega dealer to. So do your best. Nate, to wrap things up, a little quote from one aspiring writer. Maybe you're acquainted with him. I miss the fact that we don't need exotic trips to learn from life. We just need to look around. I found that when I finally stopped hurrying from one adventure to the next, I began to grow. It's the quote from the book called Living Forward, Looking Backward, written by Nate Nasralla. And I think that's a very good segue to the topic that's very dear to my heart, and that's the topic of dealing with FOMO, fear of missing out, because we're all active on LinkedIn, and when you log in to this wonderful social network, there's already 5 things that you are not doing, and you need to do them right away. And tomorrow there are 5 more and 5 more, and you're in this constant, I need to do something new. I need to do something new. I need to abandon the things that I started doing yesterday. I need to do something new. And also all this new tech, all this new frameworks. So how do you tackle this FOMO feeling, and how do you concentrate on the things that are really important? And so how do you find this inner balance?
Yeah, well, the point of the book that I was writing was to help me work out the things that I was failing at horribly and needed to learn from, right? So I'll caveat this by saying things that I'm still learning in processing on my own. So with that in mind, so the first thing that I think about is just realizing that the point of social media in many ways is to help celebrate others in their moment of achievement. Like, this is a highlight, a single snapshot or point in time that built and was the result of a lot of hard work behind that picture or celebration, right? The second thing that I think about is 2 different people will be optimizing their life for 2 different things. And so while one person may be celebrating the 60 hours of work every single week that got them to this point, and like that's what they've built an identity and set of personal values around, you may be over here saying, look, I want to beat my quota in 30 hours a week and do no more so that I can go spend time with my young kids. And if that's the value that you're optimizing life for, then great. You don't have to feel bad or put down looking at somebody else's achievement, because you got your own thing going on. And the more that you can just state for yourself what that personal value is, the more you'll be able to step back and truly celebrate what somebody else has done for them, because that's what mattered to them.
So actually it all boils down to like nailing what you really want, and like assessing everything that comes your way, any piece of data, any LinkedIn post, any advice, everything, through the prism of those criteria that you set for you. And it will help you to maintain a healthier psyche. I think it's a great wrap up.
That's right.
Nate, it was a blast. It just, I totally get that we were not discussing these quote-unquote sexy questions that everybody to know. Like we were not talking cold outreach and 25 ways to open a discovery call or post-discovery email. But I think that for seasoned pros, for the guys that been and gals who've been around the block, I'm in Enterprise Selling blog a few times. The topics that we've covered are of extreme importance. And I thank you very much for this talk. Pleasure was all mine.
Well, thanks again, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you very much.
Likewise.